The morning light slid through the cafe windows like liquid gold, soft and quiet, settling over the empty tables. I'd always loved this hour, before the world woke, before the first door opened, when time still belonged to me. Every day began the same way. The gentle hum of the espresso machine, the slow rhythm of beans grinding, and the faint scent of cinnamon and rain clinging to the wooden counter. People said my cafe was different, maybe because it never showed up on maps, or maybe because time here didn't move quite right. I called it the Last Cup, a small corner cafe at the edge of a foggy street, where people came not for coffee, but for closure. They said, if you sat at the window seat, the one with the blue cushion and the crack on the right leg, and made a wish before your coffee cooled, you could go back to any moment you once loved, or once lost. No one ever stayed long after that. Some cried, some smiled, but all of them left a little lighter than when they came. That morning, I thought I'd spend the day alone again, until the bell above the door chimed soft, hesitant, almost shy. I turned, and for a second, I forgot how to breathe. He stood there, wearing the same gray coat he used to leave behind the counter, as if he'd only stepped out for a moment and had just returned. The man I buried 3 winters ago was standing in front of me. He smiled, calm and impossibly gentle. "Clara," he said, his voice warm and steady, "can I have one last coffee?" And before the steam even rose, I knew time had found its way back to me. He sat down at his old seat, the one near the window, where sunlight always caught the edge of his cup. The gray of his coat blended with the early light, like he was made of something the morning itself had remembered. I tried to steady my breath, but the air felt heavy, soaked in all the words I hadn't said. I reached for the grinder, for the comfort of the ritual beans, heat, water, time. He watched me move behind the counter, just as he always had. It was almost cruel, how natural it felt. The grinder hummed. The aroma rose, rich and familiar, wrapping around us like the past refusing to die. He spoke first. "You still use the same blend?" "Yes," I managed to say, my voice barely more than a whisper. "You chose it." He smiled, the kind of smile that carried 1,000 unspoken apologies. "I remember you said it smelled like home." I wanted to laugh. I wanted to cry. Instead, I asked, "How are you here?" He didn't answer right away. He simply looked down at his hands, and for a moment, I saw through them, faintly, as if light passed right through his skin. "You remember the rule, don't you?" he said softly. "The coffee cools, and time closes again." I froze. The words felt like frost along my spine. "So this," I began. He nodded. "Isn't forever. Just one more cup." Silence filled the space between us. Not empty, just fragile. I poured the hot water, watched it bloom through the grounds, slow and deliberate. He had taught me that once. Let the water take its time. Time will give you the flavor you deserve. Now it was time itself that was giving me him back, for a moment too short to measure. As I set the cup before him, his fingers brushed mine, warm, real, but trembling at the edges, like smoke trying to remember being solid. He took a small sip, the same way he always did, eyes closed, patient, reverent. Then he reached into his coat and placed something on the counter. A small folded paper ticket, yellowed by age. My name was written on it, in his handwriting. "The return trip, what is this?" I whispered. "Your turn," he said, his voice fading just slightly. "Go back, Clara. Before the coffee cools." I looked down. Steam rose from the cup between us, thin silver, trembling like memory itself. And before I could speak, he was gone. The world shifted the moment my fingers touched the ticket. The paper was warm, pulsing, almost alive. A soft hum filled the air, like the cafe itself was exhaling. When I opened my eyes, everything had changed. The smell of freshly roasted beans was gone. In its place, I caught the scent of spring rain and city dust, the kind that sticks to the soles of your shoes and your heart at the same time. I knew this street. I knew this light. It was the morning 3 years ago, the day I never said goodbye. The cafe was smaller then, brighter. The paint hadn't yet chipped from the window frame, and the little sign by the door still said "Open soon." Inside, I could hear laughter, his laughter warm, unguarded, Human? For a second, I thought I might break apart. He was there, younger, alive, wiping the counter with his sleeve like he always did when he was thinking too much. He hummed softly to himself, a tune that never made it onto paper. My heart clenched around the sound. I wanted to call his name. I wanted to tell him everything. How the world had dimmed without him. How every morning I brewed the same cup hoping the steam might carry his scent back to me. But I couldn't. The rules were clear. You can watch, but you cannot change. So I stood there, trembling, as he turned toward the window. His eyes brushed past me, not through me, as if some part of him could still feel me standing there. He smiled, for no reason at all, and that was enough to make me cry. I stepped inside. The bell above the door sang the same tune it had sung 1,000 mornings before. He looked up, startled for a second, then relaxed into that easy grin I'd never stopped seeing in my dreams. "Morning, Clara," he said. "You're early." The words hit me like sunlight after a storm. I wanted to freeze the moment, keep it forever between breaths. But the clock above the counter ticked on, indifferent, inevitable. He handed me my cup, just as he always did. "Careful," he said. "It's still hot." I took it, holding the warmth like it might slip through my fingers. "I wanted to ask you something," he said, leaning on the counter, his voice soft. "Do you ever think time can be kind?" I looked at him, really looked at him. The curve of his lips, the faint shadow of stubble, the way his eyes caught the morning light, and I realized how cruelly kind time could be, how it let me see him again, only to take him away once more. I wanted to answer, to tell him the truth, that time wasn't kind, but memory was, that even when the world forgot, love remembered. But my voice broke into the silence. The steam above my cup was thinning. I knew what that meant, so I whispered the only words I had left. "It never really cooled." He frowned slightly, as if he'd heard me from a great distance. Then, his expression softened, and he smiled again. The kind of smile that felt like a goodbye, even if neither of us said it aloud. When I blinked, the world folded in on itself. The sound of the grinder faded, replaced by quiet snow. The last thing I saw was the cup between us, still warm, still waiting. When I opened my eyes, the world had turned still again. The soft hum of the espresso machine returned, steady and low, like a heartbeat I had forgotten. The light was different, colder, quieter, but the café was the same. The chair across from me was empty. Only the cup remained, half filled, faint trails of steam curling toward the ceiling like fragile ghosts. For a moment, I didn't move. I was afraid that if I did everything, the warmth, the scent, his voice would vanish again. The ticket was gone. All that remained was a faint ring of condensation on the counter, shaped like a halo. Outside, snow had begun to fall. It drifted through the morning light, slow and deliberate, like the world was relearning how to breathe. I wrapped my hands around my own cup. The heat bled into my skin, quiet and human. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang, soft, imperfect, like it had been waiting to. I didn't cry. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to. Grief had turned into something else. Not peace, exactly, but understanding. People always came to this cafe hoping to fix what time had broken. But I think now I understand what time was trying to do. It wasn't cruel. It was teaching us how to carry things, how to hold warmth without burning, how to remember without drowning. I walked to his seat. The wood was still warm, as if he'd only just stood up. There was something under the cup, a napkin, folded neatly. In his handwriting, "The steam always returns." My fingers trembled as I traced the letters. They were real, smudged faintly by the heat. I smiled, small and tired and alive. When I looked out the window, the snow had stopped. The world outside seemed softer, lighter. I turned the sign on the door to open. The bell chimed that same gentle sound that had once broken my heart. But this time, it didn't hurt. A stranger stepped in, a girl with red gloves and eyes that looked like she'd lost something she couldn't name. She hesitated, then whispered, "Is it true? That people can go back here?" I smiled. "Sometimes," I said. "But only before the coffee cools." The snow had melted by the next morning. The world outside the cafe was damp, silvered, and slow, like everything had exhaled after holding its breath too long. I arrived early, earlier than usual. The chairs were still stacked, the floor still cold beneath my steps, but the air smelled faintly of him, of cedar, soap, and the roasted beans he used to grind by hand when the machine broke down. Sometimes, I caught myself talking to him out loud. "Good morning," I said softly, placing 2 cups on the counter. "One for you, one for me." It wasn't madness. It was memory keeping itself warm. When I went to put away the sugar jars, I noticed something I'd never seen before, a thin envelope wedged at the back of the drawer. The paper was yellowed, corners frayed. Across the front, in familiar handwriting, it read, "To Clara. When the steam fades." My chest tightened. It was my handwriting. I sat down, the envelope trembling in my hands. I didn't remember writing it, but the ink, the curves, they were mine. Inside was a single folded page, and one sentence written at the top. "If he ever comes back, don't ask why, just listen." I read it over and over. The words didn't explain anything, but somehow, they answered everything. I must have written it years ago, maybe during the days when grief blurred into routine, when I had tried to convince myself he was gone for good. Maybe I had known deep down that the world had its own rhythm, that love sometimes took the long way home. Underneath the note there was a coffee receipt, dated 3 years ago, the day he died. But the handwriting on it wasn't mine. It was his. 2 words, "Thank you." I pressed the paper to my chest, the ink faintly smudging against my heartbeat. For the first time, I didn't wonder where he had gone. For the first time, I felt he had never left. The cafe was quiet, but not empty. The morning light drifted in through the windows, catching the dust in slow spirals, each one a small, silent promise that the steam would rise again. The memory came like the smell of rain before it falls, faint, electric, inevitable. I was 19 the first time I met him. The city was younger then, or maybe I was. The streets shone with the reflection of yellow lights and puddles that looked like liquid glass. I had just lost my part-time job at the bakery. My shoes were soaked through, my umbrella had broken, and I was standing under the narrow awning of an unfamiliar shop that smelled of coffee and wet pavement. The sign above the door said, "The Last Cup." I remember thinking it was a strange name, like something meant for endings, not beginnings. When I stepped inside, the sound hit me first. The hiss of steam, the hum of jazz, the faint clink of a spoon against porcelain. The warmth wrapped around me like an old coat. And then, there he was. Behind the counter, sleeves rolled up, dark hair falling slightly over his eyes. He looked up and smiled, a little surprised, a little curious. "Rough day?" he asked. I nodded, my breath fogging in the cold air. "You could say that." He poured me a cup before I even ordered. "On the house," he said. "Everyone deserves warmth on a day like this." The first sip burned my tongue, sharp, alive, honest. He laughed softly. "Too hot?" I shook my head. "No, just right." He leaned against the counter, watching the rain blur the windows. "You know," he said, "I've always thought rain is like time. You can't stop it. You can only learn to stand in it." I remember smiling, because I didn't understand what he meant. Not then. He asked for my name. "Clara," I said. "Clara," he repeated, like testing the sound of something fragile. "I'm Elias." That was the first promise he ever made. Not spoken, not written. Just something that settled quietly between us like warmth in a cup. Before I left, he called out, "Come back tomorrow. The coffee's always better the second day." And I did. Every day after that. Now, years later, standing in the same cafe, the memory felt close enough to touch. I could almost hear the rain against the glass again. The laughter that had once made time feel kind. The receipt with his thank you still lay on the counter. I traced the ink with my fingertip and whispered, "You were right. The second cup is better." There was an old clock hanging above the counter. It hadn't worked for years, its hands frozen at 3:47. The time he once said was the quietest minute of the day. He'd refused to fix it. Some things, he told me once, are meant to stay still. They remind us that even when time stops, life doesn't. After he was gone, I kept the clock there out of habit. Customers sometimes noticed. Broken, they'd ask. I always smiled. Not broken. Just resting. But that morning, something was different. The air felt charged, like a pause before thunder. The cafe was empty, yet alive. I could hear the faint ticking, slow, hesitant, unsure of itself. I looked up. The hands of the clock were moving. At first I thought it was just my eyes, a trick of light, or maybe grief's way of playing with reality. But no. The minute hand trembled forward, a single heartbeat of motion. 3 to 48. The sound grew steadier, the rhythm syncing with the soft hum of the espresso machine. Tick, tick, tick. It wasn't loud, but it filled every corner of the cafe. The sound of time not returning, but forgiving. I felt something in me unclench. For years, I had treated time like an enemy, something that took, that erased, that separated. But now I wondered if time had simply been waiting for me to be ready to move again. The snow outside was melting fast, the drops sliding down the glass like seconds reborn. I turned the sign on the door to open. A customer walked in, a man in his 30s, carrying a notebook and wearing the same uncertain look I once had. He hesitated. "This place, it feels familiar," he said softly. "Maybe it is," I answered, handing him a menu. Time has a strange way of bringing people back. He smiled, shy but genuine. "Can I sit by the window?" "Of course." As I prepared his order, the ticking of the clock grew stronger, not urgent, just steady, certain. When I looked up again, it read 3:49. The minute that refused to move, for years, had finally passed. And somehow, I knew. He was the one who had set it in motion. The rain returned that evening, soft, almost tender, tapping against the window like a hesitant melody. ID left the cafe open later than usual. There was something about rainy nights that made people linger, as if the world outside had forgotten how to move. The man with the notebook had already left. Only the sound of dripping and the slow spin of the ceiling fan kept me company. Then the bell above the door rang, a gentle chime that felt almost familiar. A girl stepped inside, clutching a damp scarf, her hair dripping from the rain. She looked around the cafe as though she recognized it from a dream. "Welcome," I said softly. She gave a small, nervous smile. "I don't know why I came here," she murmured. "I was just walking, and my feet brought me in." "That happens here," I said. "Some doors open when you need them to." Her eyes flicked toward the window seat, his seat. "Can I sit there?" I hesitated only for a second, then nodded. "Of course. But there's one rule." She tilted her head. "What rule?" "Don't let the coffee cool." She laughed lightly. "That's easy enough." I prepared the cup the same way I always had. The blend he chose. The slow pour he taught me. The aroma filled the air like memory in liquid form. When I placed the cup before her, she looked at me strangely. "Have we met before?" Her voice was soft, almost trembling. Something in her tone made my chest tighten. I looked at her more closely, the shape of her hands, the curve of her smile, the faint freckle under her left eye. And then I froze. Because I realized who she was. She was me. Younger, unsure. Still waiting for the first version of love to return. She didn't seem to notice. She just stared out the window, eyes shining with the kind of hope that breaks you. "I don't know why I feel this," she whispered. "Like I've been here before. Like I'm supposed to remember something." I swallowed hard, steadying my voice. "Maybe you're not supposed to remember," I said. "Maybe you're just supposed to feel that you were loved." She turned to me, confused, on the edge of tears. "By who?" The rain hit the glass harder, blurring her reflection. "By time," I said, "and by someone who never really left." She smiled faintly, though she didn't understand. Then she took a sip. Steam rose, silver and alive, wrapping around her face like light. When she looked up again, the chair across from her, his chair wasn't empty anymore. She gasped. And I, watching from behind the counter, could swear I saw him too. Elias. He sat there, calm and quiet, eyes filled with the same warmth that once healed me. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Sometimes love doesn't return in words, only in the warmth between two cups. The steam rose higher, shimmering like the moment before a dream fades. And when it cleared, the chair was empty again. The girl blinked, confused, then smiled through her tears. "I think I understand," she whispered. "The coffee's still warm." I nodded, my throat too tight to answer. And for the first time since the day he left, I realized I wasn't the only one the cafe was saving. It happened 3 nights after the rain. The cafe was closed, the chairs turned upside down on the tables, the only light coming from the faint glow of the street lamp outside. I'd been cleaning the counter when I heard a click, soft, mechanical, out of place. It came from the old shelf near the record player. That player hadn't worked in years, but tonight, it hummed to life on its own. The reel inside began to spin, slow and uneven, like an old heart remembering how to beat. I froze. Then, a familiar sound filled the room, a single piano note, fragile, almost uncertain, followed by another, and another. The melody was slow, delicate, a sequence of falling notes that reminded me of the way rain touches glass. It was the song he used to play when we closed the shop together, the one he never finished writing. My knees gave way, and I sat down, the sound surrounding me like a whisper. No lyrics, no name, just a feeling warm and endless. As the music swelled, I heard his voice faint, recorded over the melody. "If you're hearing this, it means the cafe remembered you before I did. It means time's doing what I couldn't, keeping you company. Clara, I never learned how to say goodbye properly, so I wrote this instead." The piano paused a breath between lifetimes. "This song's called Steam, because I wanted to leave something that disappears, but still warms." The reel crackled softly. I pressed my palms together, afraid that even breathing too loudly might erase it. He chuckled quietly through the tape. "You probably rolled your eyes just now. You always said I talked too much when I was nervous." I laughed, a broken, trembling sound that melted into tears. "But if you're still listening, Clara, then the song's not over." And then the piano began again, higher, lighter, lifting like morning light breaking through clouds. The melody rose, wrapped in static, and just before it faded, I heard him whisper one last thing. "When you hear this, make another cup. Don't stop brewing. Someone new will need it soon." The tape clicked. Silence followed, deep, full, forgiving. I didn't move for a long time. I just sat there, letting the warmth of his words settle into the air, the same way coffee steam lingers long after the cup is empty. When I finally stood, I turned to the counter and started the grinder. The night filled again with sound. Beans, water, time, his rhythm, my heartbeat. The song he left behind had become my way forward. Morning came gently, the kind of morning that didn't break but unfolded. Light moved through the windows like it was afraid to disturb the peace inside. I'd fallen asleep on the counter again, the tape from last night still resting in the player, silent but humming faintly, as if it still remembered the song. When I stood, the cafe felt different. The air was thicker, warmer. It wasn't just the heat from the machines. It was alive, breathing. I brewed a new cup without thinking. Same blend, same rhythm. But when I lifted the pot, the steam didn't rise, it lingered. It hung there, suspended in the morning light, silver and steady, refusing to fade. I blinked once, twice, still there. The warmth spread through the room like a quiet tide, wrapping around the tables, the walls, even the old clock above me, which now read 3:47. The minute had returned to where it began, but the hands didn't stop this time. They kept moving, tick, tick, slow, patient, certain. I carried the cup to the window seat. Outside, the sky was clearing, rain turning to sunlight. The world was neither yesterday nor tomorrow, it was just now. I set the cup down, and for a heartbeat, I saw him again. Elias. Not as a ghost. Not as memory. Just light. The outline of him in the reflection. His hand resting on the cup like he'd never left. He smiled, small, knowing, endless. And then the steam curled between us, as if whispering all the words we'd never had time to say. I smiled back. No tears this time. Just gratitude, for the warmth that stayed. The bell above the door rang. A soft breeze swept through, and the steam shimmered. spreading across the cafe like a blessing. It didn't vanish. Not this time. I wrote a small note on the napkin and placed it beside the cup. For whoever comes next, you're right on time. Then I unlocked the door and turned the sign to open. The world moved on, but the coffee stayed warm. It had been months since the day the steam stayed. The world outside the cafe had shifted through seasons. Winter's hush giving way to spring rain. Then sunlight, then the faint scent of lilacs drifting in from the corner flower stall. Life was quieter now. The cafe didn't draw crowds, but it didn't need to. People still came, some for coffee, others for closure, and sometimes, for reasons they couldn't explain, they left lighter. One afternoon, as I wiped the counter, the door opened and a young woman stepped in. Hair tied back loosely, eyes bright and uncertain. "Are you hiring?" she asked, voice soft, hopeful. I smiled. "I wasn't planning to," I said, "but maybe I am now." She laughed nervously, holding out a small folded note. "I found this outside your door. I think it's yours." The note was written on an old napkin, the same kind I'd used months ago. The ink had faded, but the words were still there. "For whoever comes next, you're right on time." My hands trembled slightly as I took it. "Seems it was meant for you," I said. Her eyes widened. Really? I taught her the basics that day, how to grind the beans, how to let the water fall in circles instead of lines, how to listen for the soft hum that meant the temperature was just right. She learned quickly, but what caught me most was how she smiled when she brewed. There was gentleness in it, the kind that time doesn't teach, only life. When we closed that evening, she looked around and asked, "Is it true what people say about this place?" "What do they say?" I asked. "That, sometimes, if you sit by the window, you can see someone you miss." I wiped my hands on my apron, smiling faintly. "Maybe, but it only works if the coffee's still warm." She laughed softly. "I like that." We stood in silence for a while, watching the light outside fade from gold to blue. The clock ticked gently above us, 3:50, moving, alive. Before leaving, she turned at the door. "Miss Clara, why do you keep it open every day, even when no one comes?" I looked around the quiet cafe, the chairs, the soft music, the cup still waiting on the window seat. "Because," I said, "someone always does." She smiled, and as the door closed behind her, the bell chimed, the same sound that once meant beginnings, and now meant continuance. I turned off the lights. The cafe glowed faintly in the reflection of the street lamp, like a small star in the middle of time. The note lay on the counter again, edges curling, ink barely visible, but still legible enough to read. "You're right on time." The morning was quiet again, the kind of quiet that doesn't come from emptiness, but from peace. I opened the cafe early, long before the streets began to stir. The first light touched the tables, the walls, the cup still sitting by the window, the same one I left yesterday, still faintly warm. I didn't refill it. I didn't need to. Some warmth, I realized, doesn't fade, it waits. Outside, the city stretched awake. A child ran past with a loaf of bread. The florist next door rolled up her shutters. A cat perched on the doorstep, blinking lazily at the sun. Life moving on gently, endlessly. I brewed one last cup. The rhythm was the same. Beans, heat, water, time. But this time, it felt different. Not like a ritual, but like gratitude. As the steam rose, I found myself smiling at the sound. That soft hiss, the one that once broke my heart, now felt like a friend returning home. I thought of everyone who had come through this door. The woman who wrote letters to her younger self. The man who brought a photograph and left without it. The girl who sat by the window and saw someone she thought was gone. Each one carrying their small fragments of love and loss, and leaving behind a little more light. Maybe that was what this place was meant for. Not to change time, but to remind us that time doesn't erase, it keeps. The clock above me ticked softly, 3:47. The quietest minute of the day. I looked out the window, and for a moment, I swore I saw him again. Elias, walking down the street, hands in his pockets, smiling the way he always did, as if he knew something I didn't. He turned the corner and vanished. But I didn't feel the ache this time, only warmth. I whispered, "Thank you for staying." The steam curled higher, soft and golden in the light, and I watched it twist and shimmer until it became part of the air, part of everything. When I turned the sign on the door to open, a breeze entered, gentle, new. Somewhere in that wind, I heard his voice again. "Keep it warm, Clara." And so I did. Every day after I brewed the same cup, for whoever came through the door, and for whoever still needed to. Because maybe that's all any of us can do, to keep the warmth alive, for as long as we can, before the coffee cools.